Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as SAFFRONOLIVE, and it's time for a very special video. This is the very first episode of a new series we're trying. This is a Fish Doctor or Deck Doctoring series, basically. So the idea of the series is pretty simple. Y'all send in deck lists that maybe you're having problems with, need some fixing, and then we will talk about them. Talk about what's good, what's bad, what's happening with the deck, the problems with the deck, and then we will try to fix the deck and make the deck better. So if you'd like your own deck considered for a future edition of Fish Doctor, make sure to leave a link in the comments. One thing I want to mention really quick is I know tons of you send in decks for instant deck techs, and that is awesome. Keep doing that. It's super helpful, and there's so many cool decks. But I did not want to just grab decks for instant deck techs and use them on the Deck Doctor series because we're going to be being, I guess, critical, not in a friendly way. We're not going to be being mean, but we're going to be changing the deck, looking at problems with the deck. So I didn't want to accidentally embarrass anyone by taking their pet deck and being like, oh, I don't like this about it, and I don't like that about it, and let's change it like this. So if you want a deck considered for this series, leave a link in the comments to this video, or you can also email me, but just make sure to tag it as Fish Doctor, Deck Doctor, something like that, so I know that you want it for this series and not for the Instant Deck Tech series. So anyway, our deck for this week is called Blue-White Auras and Equipment, and it comes to us from CHAARNE78. So for this first episode, I put the call out on Twitter, asked for people to give me submissions, and this one was pretty interesting because it has a lot of cards that I like. It's got Urza's Ruinous Blast, it's got Teferis and Gideons and some sweet equipment and Oath of Teferis and counter spells, so it's got a lot of stuff going on and a lot of cards that I really like. But looking at this deck, there's a little bit of issues with the deck. So anyway, how this is going to work is pretty simple. We're going to talk about this deck first, the deck that was sent in, Blue-White Auras and Equipment. We're going to kind of break it down, then we're going to talk about our changes, and eventually have the completed, updated Doctor deck list. So as far as Blue-White Auras and Equipment, the overall theme of the deck is kind of like blue-white stuff. We got a bunch of different stuff going on, and for me, that is the biggest problem with the deck. So when you're building decks, it's really tempting to just try to do every single cool thing. Like, we got Zalids, and we got some equipment, and we got some Planeswalkers, and some Oath of Teferis. Well, maybe, like, let me just break it down with this deck and give you a good example of what I'm talking about. So this deck in specific, it has basically 3 specific packages. So first off, we have our Equipment and Auras package. So we have 6 equipment, 3 Blackblade Reforge, which requires a legendary creature. Basically, you're not going to equip it for 7 very often. That's not going to be good if you're paying 7 to equip it. And then 3 Forebear's Blade. And then we have Curator's Ward, which is basically something to go on a creature. Like, it can go on any permanent, but we're mostly putting it on creatures to protect our creatures, I think, and then get the equipment on them, make them huge. So we have all this stuff, 10 cards in all that need to go on creatures. However, we only have 6 creatures in the deck, and not only 6 creatures, but they're legendary creatures. We have 3 Shalis, we have 3 Zahids, so that means we don't have that much stuff to put our equipment and our auras on. We have way more equipment and auras than we do actual creatures. So that's kind of package 1, equipment, but then some creatures. Then we have package number 2, which is kind of this Artifact Matters theme. So we got Zahid, which doesn't need an artifact, but certainly wants an artifact. When you're casting it for 4 mana, it is way better than when you're casting it for 6 mana. At 6 mana, not a constructed playable card. At 4 mana, it's big enough that it is actually in the conversation. And then we also have Antiquities War, which basically requires an artifact. Like, if you're not hitting artifacts with the first 2 lore counters, Antiquities War is really bad, and then if you don't have a reasonable number of artifacts on the battlefield, when you get the 3rd lore counter, it's also pretty bad. The challenge here is, we just don't have that many artifacts. We have the equipment that we already talked about, along with 3 treasure maps, and while 9 artifacts are probably fine for Zahid, maybe cutting it a little close, but good enough, 9 is not enough for the Antiquities War. We're going to have a reasonable number of times where we just get that lore counter and straight up whiff with Antiquities War, and then when we ultimate our Antiquities War, we can only have 1 Blackblade Reforge on the battlefield since it's legendary, so maybe we have Forebear's Blade, maybe we flip to Treasure Map, but a lot of times Antiquities War just isn't going to do much of anything in our deck. Finally, we have 3 copies of Oath of Teferi, and I love Oath of Teferi. It's one of my favorite cards in Standard. The problem is, we only have 3 Planeswalkers. We literally have as many Planeswalkers Planeswalkers as we do Oath of Teferis. So we're going to have lots of games where we're drawing maybe even multiple copies of Oath of Teferi with no Planeswalkers on the battlefield. So this means, overall, the deck, it has a ton of powerful things going on. A powerful equipment package, a potentially powerful artifact package, a potentially powerful planeswalker package. The problem is these pieces don't really interact, and what's going to happen with this deck is we're going to have lots of games where we draw some cards from the different parts of the deck that don't really interact together. We're going to have hands where we have a bunch of equipment and auras and Oath of Teferi, but no planeswalkers and creatures. We're going to have games where we have our random planeswalkers, no Oath of Teferi, and a bunch of equipment that can't go on anything. So the challenge of this deck, and doctoring the deck, is to really pick one of these aspects of the deck, focus in on that aspect of the deck. In this case, I think the problem with the deck is while it has tons of powerful things going on, those powerful things don't really necessarily work together. It's almost a case of too much cool, powerful stuff happening. So our challenge is focusing in on one aspect of the deck and strengthening that aspect of the deck so we don't run into those situations where we have no creatures and a bunch of equipment, or a bunch of Oath of Teferis and no planeswalkers. So our challenge now is figuring out what part of the deck to go with. So in theory, we could go with any aspect of the deck. We could make it a planeswalker blue-white control deck. We got counters, we got some planeswalkers, throw in more planeswalkers for Oath of Teferi. We could make it a big flyer deck, throw in Lyras, get rid of the equipment. But I think that the name of the deck is important here because it's blue-white auras and equipment. So I think we'd be remiss if we just got rid of all the equipment, got rid of all the auras, built blue-white control, because it seems like, based on the name, the goal is to kind of embrace the power of Blackblade Reforge, of Forebearer's Blade, of Curator's Ward. So I think that's probably the best way to make that happen. So first off, as far as changing the deck, step one is to reduce the different number of packages or parts of the deck. So we drop the Planeswalker package. We just don't have enough support to make Oath of Teferi work with the minimal number of Planeswalkers. And one of the problems with the deck is we don't have enough creatures for our equipment. So to make room for more creatures, we just kind of push this part of the deck off to the side, kind of get rid of it, get rid of the Oath of Teferis altogether. Teferi, I could see an argument for playing some Teferis or Gideons just because they're generically powerful cards, but they don't really work with what our deck is trying to do. They're keeping us too unfocused. Then we have the Antiquities War, which also has to just go. There's not enough artifacts in the deck. We could try to up the artifact count to make it work, but because of our equipment plan, I don't know if it's really worth it. I think we are better off trying to up our creature count to make our equipment good when we have them, especially considering that we already have legendary equipment that aren't good in multiples and can't really benefit from the ultimate third lore counter from Antiquities War. So that leaves us with our updated build of blue-white auras and equipment. So the updated build basically focuses in on the artifact and aura part of the deck. So we have a bunch more creatures. We have plenty of ways to embrace and use our equipment, our Blackblade Reforge, also our Forebearer's Blade. These are things that need us to have not only creatures, but a specific type of creature on the battlefield. So the biggest additions to the deck are a ton more creatures. We drop the Planeswalkers, we drop the Antiquities War, and we bring in 4 copies of Strom, 3 copies of Brawl, 2 copies of Hope of Gurpur, 2 Danitha Compassion Paragon. So these creatures meet the criteria for our Blackblade Reforge Forebearer's Blade plan. So what our equipment are asking for are 2 things. They want cheap creatures. They want us to have multiple creatures on the battlefield because the power of Forebearer's Blade is the free equip when the creature that's already equipped dies, and those creatures need to be legendary because Blackblade Reforge, not playable if you're paying 7 mana to equip it. So within the confines of what our equipment are asking for, cheap, legendary creatures that can show up in multiples, these are our best options. We still keep our other creatures. We keep a couple Zahids, we keep a couple of Shalais, but Strom is perfect for the plan of our deck. We already got auras, we already got equipment, so we're drawing some cards for free. Plus, it is a 4-of, it is legendary, that can be clunky, but Strom is the kind of card that people kill right away, because they know if you untap with it, you're going to draw a bunch of cards, pull ahead in the game. Brawl probably looks weird, but we do have a few spells in the deck from the original build, the Negates, the Syncopates, so we do still have some things that benefit from it. Plus, it's just another cheap legendary creature that we can put our equipment on. What we really want to be doing is kind of curving moving out, where we're playing a creature, playing an equipment, equipping the equipment, start beating down with a huge threat. Hope Agura just works well with the curve. We can play Hope on turn 1. Turn 2, we can play our Blackblade Reforge. Turn 3, we equip it, start attacking with a 4/4 in the air to get kind of that aggro-y nut draw. Plus, it's an artifact for our Zahid. We want to make sure we keep the artifact count high so we can get down Zahid. And then Danitha Compassion just works well with our planet. Makes our ores and equipments a little bit cheaper. Also a great creature to wear ores and equipments because of First Strike, Vigilance, and Lifelink. It's a way we can pull back ahead if we fall behind. Then we do a little bit more tweaking. So one of the things from the initial build of the deck was it had Board the Weatherlight, but it had it in the sideboard. And I think, especially with these changes where we're upping our legendary creature count, and we have all these artifacts in our deck, which are also historic, I think it's worth it as a main deck slot. So it's a way we can dig for Sram, Baral, any of our creatures, plus it's digging for our big payoffs, our Blackblade Reforge, our Forebear's Blade. And then since we have Board the Weatherlight, we can kind of bring in one on Sarah's Wings as an extra aura/equipment, which is on theme with the deck. And then we can tutor for it with our Board the Weatherlight, hopefully dig for it. This also gives us an interesting nut draw where we can play, like, let's say Sram on turn 2, play a Curator's Ward, of all things, on turn 3 to give our Sram, or whatever our 2-drop is. It works with Brawl and all of our other early game creatures. Give it hexproof, and then put it on Sarah's Wings on it to start getting in and gaining life. And then, whenever we find a Forebear's Blade or a Blackblade Reforge, it's just going to pretty much put the game away. Really hard to deal with that huge attacking threat. So that's kind of the changes to the main deck as far as the non-land cards. There's also a couple of other things I wanted to mention. So one thing to check when you're doing a deck doctoring or when you're building a deck is the number of lands. And the initial deck had a total of 23 lands, which is just not quite enough for the deck. We have some 5-drops, Urza's Ruinous Blast, we had Teferi, Zahid's 4 mana, so 23 is just cutting it a little bit short. So we cut one of the Blink of the Eyes to go down to 1 copy, went up another Field of Ruin, so we have 2 total copies now. You could add any land there. I chose Field of Ruin because I really like Field of Ruin. It kind of fixes your mana, it deals with some problematic things, Cabal Strongholds from Mono Black, and Search for Azcanta flipping, but I feel like the deck needed one more land, so it was 1 land light, so that makes up for that. The other big change was to the sideboard. So the initial build, it had stuff in the sideboard, but I didn't really understand what the deck was trying to do in the sideboard. So we had multiple copies of Aketra's Last Mercy, of Navigator's Compass, and Sparring Construct. And when you're building a sideboard, I think that it's important to figure out what you're trying to beat. And it feels like this is trying to beat maybe mono red with all the life gain type stuff, but I'm not even sure these are the best options for that. They're very non-traditional. If you're looking to beat mono red, kind of the go-to card might be Authority of the Consuls in the sideboard. So I'm not really understanding why we have 5 total copies, I believe, of Aketra's Last Mercy and Navigator's Compass, and I don't know what Sparring Construct is for. Like, I guess if you're going to play Sparring Construct, it's kind of the card you want in your main deck. It doesn't really protect you from Wrath. If it dies, it puts a counter on something. That's not a huge payoff anyway, but it's not like you're gonna have another creature if it dies to a Wrath. So I don't really understand the point of Sparring Construct, especially since we're playing Blackblade Reforge and it can't really wear our equipment well. You would never want to play a Curator's Ward on it. So as a result, change up the sideboard a bit by mostly adding in just kind of the staples. Like, when it comes to sideboarding, there's no real reason to reinvent the wheel. A lot of sideboard looks fairly similar because in Standard, there's a limited number of decks, and the things you're trying to beat are fairly similar. So we have Settle the Wreckage to deal with aggro. We have Cast Out to deal with opposing gods. Also Rekindling Phoenixes, Planeswalkers, but also Scarab Gods, and things like Hazoret. We have Authority of the Consuls as our life gain beat mono red card over the less traditional Aketra's Last Mercy, Navigator's Compass, and then we already had Teferi in the deck, so it's easy to just slide it into the sideboard and have it for control matchups. So that's where the Teferi ended up. It's a strong enough card that we still want it, but since it isn't really on theme with what we're trying to build, I think it's better off in the sideboard, which brings us to our end result of blue-white ores and equipments, and I feel like this is a much more focused deck. Whether or not it's better, I think the answer is yes, because it's going to be more consistent. We narrowed in on one plan, the plan that's in the name of the deck, blue-white ores and equipment. We did everything possible to make that plan work. This plan, admittedly, it's a very rogue plan. It's not a plan that we see breaking the top tiers of Standard, so we're probably still dealing with a budget / against the odds style deck. more than a deck that's going to break into the top tiers of the format, but we did build around the theme of our deck. We have enough creatures now for our equipment, so our Blackblade Reforge is going to have something to go on. Our Forebear's Blade is going to have something to go on when the first creature dies. Our Curator Ward can actually enchant something. So we have a way to really embrace that plan now, and that leaves us with a deck that should be much more consistent. Whether it will be consistently good enough to beat the powerful tier decks in the format, that's a whole nother question, but that's not really the point of that. If our goal is to build blue-white auras and equipment, I feel like this is a pretty good way of going about it. So I will say the weirdness of the deck to some extent is the counterspell package. We could go even further to get rid of the syncopates and get rid of the blink of an eye and just really focusing on that. But we do have the brawls now, and syncopate actually works really well with brawl. So while we did cut the negates from the main deck and move those into the sideboard with Teferi, syncopate's kind of sweet because for 1 mana you can cast it X1 if you have a brawl on the battlefield. I also really love the brawl Urza's Ruinous Blast synergy. Nice way to cast it for 4 mana, and Ruinous Blast just steals games on its own even at 5 mana. So casting it a little cheaper is nice. So anyway, that's been our first edition of Deck Doctor, blue-white auras and equipment. So again, thanks for submitting the deck. If you want your own deck considered for a future one, leave it in the comments. Also, what do you want from this series? Like, you kind of got a little bit of the theory, the deck building behind the Deck Doctor series, but what are you wanting to see? Like, what would make this series better? What are you expecting from the Deck Doctor series? Make sure to let me know that as well, with what you would really like to see, because we're kind of just trying to figure this out as we go along. Should there be gameplay? How would the gameplay even work? What other additions should there be? How should we show it visually on screen? So if you got any feedback, make sure to let me know, because I think this could be a fun reoccurring series, but I found it to be a lot more challenging than I thought to actually put it out in a video form. So let me know what you think about that as well. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.